Mortimer, we've been saying that the most important thing to remember in reading any work of fiction is to involve yourself in it, to open yourself to it, to participate in the life, in the successes, in the problems of the characters. But that doesn't mean, and this is a highly emotional participation, that doesn't mean that your mind stays inactive.
I hope not.
Right? At the same time that you're reading, or after you've read a good novel, it's your obligation as a good reader to criticize it, to judge it as being good or bad.
And to know why it's good or bad.
And to know why it's, you have to give reasons why it's good or bad, right? I think there are two essential questions that you have to ask about a novel, and that is it good in its own terms? Is it good as a fictional work? Is it technically correct? Does it succeed as a book? And secondly, is it true to life? Now,
not true in a scientific sense of true, but poetically true.
Poetically true.
Does it have a verisimilitude? Does it have probability?
Right.
Is it, as Plato used to say, a likely story?
Exactly. That's the perfect way to put it. We read recently George Eliot's Middlemarch.
Yes, I enjoyed that enormously.
And we were very much struck by its verisimilitude, by its... It is a likely story of not only just 2 or 3 people, but of a whole town. It recreates a town.
In the 1830s in England.
Yeah. But we both felt, I think you agreed with me, that the plot was very defective. It was a highly melodramatic 19th century novelistic plot.
You're conscious of a plot if the turning points in it are such sheer coincidences that might not happen.
Right.
That's, by the way, one of my criticisms of many novels, that the story hangs on coincidences.
Yeah, well, it never should.
No.
And every good critic has always pointed that out when it happens. George Eliot is curious. She was so marvelously able to create a whole world, and yet she couldn't tell a simple, straightforward story without the plot creaking as she went along. On the other hand, Gone with the Wind has a perfect plot.
Yes.
There couldn't be a more perfect novel, technically speaking, and it made a great movie too. But its verisimilitude, to me, is highly defective. I mean, it's very romantic and sentimental, and its view of the South before the Civil War is largely nonsense.
Yes, yes. I think that's true.
It may be the way we would like it to have been, but it is not the way it was. War and Peace, I think, satisfies both criteria, doesn't it?
For me, it does perfectly.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
It is.
So does Tom Jones, as a matter of fact.
But War and Peace is true to life. Even though we didn't live in Russia at the beginning of the 19th.
The plot unfolds the way a stream runs downhill.
And you're never conscious of the plot. You're not even conscious of the author's language somehow or other.
That, by the way, is the highest praise you can give any author.
Yes, I think so.
If his writing is so perfect that you're unaware of it.
But at the same time, there's a problem that many readers have with War and Peace, and that is the enormous cast of characters. In the first chapter of War and Peace, about 30 people are introduced to the reader. Their names are strange, they're Russian names.
But Charles, all of us go to cocktail parties. You walk into a large room filled with people with glasses in their hands. You are introduce them quickly. You don't remember their names, but if you stay around long enough, you gradually become acquainted with them. So in a novel like War and Peace, you mustn't be upset by that overwhelming cast of characters at the beginning. You stay around with them. And as you live through that novel, you gradually become acquainted with those characters exactly as you become acquainted with people that you meet in ordinary life.
Or on moving to a new town.
Yes, precisely.
When you first move there, you don't know who your neighbors are. You don't know who's going to be important to you. But as you live there for 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years...
They sort themselves out.
They sort themselves out. Well, a good author of a novel can be depended upon to bring to the fore the people who are important. So I never worry if I don't remember the name of a character at the beginning. I would never stop reading a novel.
Oh, no. That'd be
because I didn't know who the people were. So one of the things that a good reader does in reading a work of fiction is to judge it critically from these points of view, these 2 points of view. But he also is, I think, required to be able to say, in very short compass, what the book as a whole is about. That is to state its plot in the simplest terms. Could you state the plot of the Odyssey, for example, in a couple of sentences?
I could, but Aristotle did it better than I can, I think. Let me read you Aristotle's summary in a few sentences of the plot of the whole Odyssey. He says, a certain man is absent from home for many years. He is jealously watched by Poseidon, the god of the sea, and left desolate. Meanwhile, his home is in a wretched plight. Suitors are wasting his substance and plotting against his son. At length, tempest-tossed, he himself arrives and makes certain persons acquainted with him. He attacks the suitors with his own hand and is himself preserved while he destroys them.
That's pretty good, except that it's
too long.
It's too long. It's a little too long. You didn't have to mention Poseidon.
No.
All you'd have to say is that he's away from home. People, in his absence, try to destroy his house. He comes home and single-handed, or with the help of his son, overcomes them and lives happily ever after.
The only thing that leaves out is, it took 9 years to get there.
Yeah.
And one of the great questions in that was how anxious he was to get home.
Yeah.
Did all those adventures really delay him, or did he himself employ delaying tactics in getting home?
And of course, the important thing to remember there is that he was spending those 9 years with a lady named Calypso.
I think the shortest summary of the plot was given for me once by our mutual friend, Clifton Fadiman. He and I were discussing Tom Jones with a class of students, and Fadiman said, plot is very simple. Boy meets girl, boy wants girl, boy gets girl.
Yeah. Hamlet could be, I think, that the longest play that Shakespeare wrote by far. It's 3 times as long as Macbeth, but it could be summed up very simply in that a father learns that a son learns that his father has been murdered, discovers who the murderer is, fails to kill him in time, and therefore dies himself.
Now that's interesting, because a number of times in which I've read Hamlet with a seminar in great books, I've always asked one question that's almost taken 2 hours for everybody in the class to answer. I say, tell me the story. Mm-hmm. And not just the plot, not summarize the plot, but begin at the beginning and tell the story. And you can never get 20 people to agree about what happens in Hamlet. Mm-hmm. As they tell the story, they're not telling the story simply, but adding their interpretation of motive, interest, thought, and of course people differ about those interpretations.
Yeah. The reason why it's important to be able to state the plot of a novel or a play is because that's the first question that a reader always have to ask. What's it about? Yeah. And that applies to imaginative literature as well as it applies to expository literature.
Let me do it for expository literature. Just as we did it for Tom Jones or Odyssey, I'd say take the whole of Aristotle's Ethics. It's a book about the pursuit of happiness, about the conditions of this pursuit, and how virtue is indispensable for happiness. Yeah. That's the whole book, isn't it?
That's beautiful. Yeah. That takes a lot of reading and a lot of thinking to be able to
But that's what you must do about a book.
To distill. How long is that book? 300 pages?
300 pages, yes.
Yeah, something like that, into 3 sentences. Now, a novel doesn't always simply entertain us with a story. It sometimes attempts to do other things as well, to teach us something about the world, to promote a certain view of reality or of social and economic conditions.
It must not blatantly instruct.
No, it must not, but it often does instruct, and a good reader of it is docile with respect to it. He allows it to instruct him as well as to entertain him. Gulliver's Travels, for example, is a marvelous story.
It's a great satire, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it's a novel. It's a satirical novel or a novelistic satire, but at the same time, it has a view of the way things are and the way things should be that Swift is very clearly trying to tell us.
There, it seems to me, you're much more conscious of the author's thought than you are of the story.
Right.
The story is a vehicle for his expressing his thought. You know, Ibsen was accused of writing problem plays. In our day, there are problem novels. Grapes of Wrath, for example, it doesn't move. I mean, I don't like a novel to be a sociological tract or a reformist doctrine. I don't like a novelist to be a social reformer, as I think, in this case, the Grapes of Wrath tried to be.
But when you come to a novel like Uncle Tom's Cabin, for example,
that's a tract.
Harriet Beecher Stowe, that is just a tract.
Yeah.
By the way, it has a great plot. It's melodramatic, but it is a plot that has captured people's attention for 100 years. It's the all-time most favorite play, you know, the play made out of Uncle Tom's Cabin, all-time most favorite play in American history. It had an enormous effect because sometimes books, novels that are written from this point of view with a doctrine embedded in the story, with a preachment, yes, have practical effects. And
Oh, no question about it.
President Lincoln said to Mrs. Stowe when he met her, "So you're the little woman that made the Great War," because there was a sense in which the Civil War came about because of the enormous impact of that story on the North. There are other novels that preach in this way. Upton Sinclair's The
Yes,
Jungle is a
yes.
very famous example of this. Sinclair wrote a novel about the packing house industry in Chicago in around 1900, and within the novel was so graphic and so terrible in its description of what was actually done in the slaughterhouses that within 4 or 5 years laws have been passed making illegal what he described. But it's not really a very good story. 1984 is a better story. It clearly has a doctrine. The fearful thing about that is that although we see what Orwell was predicting would happen in only a decade from now, we wonder whether it won't happen whether we know whether we object or not.
Matter of fact, what I just said about War and Peace is interesting because obviously Tolstoy is not satisfied just to tell a story. He does want to instruct us about history and the character of war and peace. But he does it quite consciously and clearly. Those prefaces to the chapters or to the parts of the book are explicitly an attempt to say what he thinks, and then the story resumes itself. And you're never disturbed by that, it seems to me.
Essentially, though, in the long run, what the most important thing a novel must do is to teach you not about exterior reality, about
yourself.
Yes, about yourself. Yes.
And that's why, by the way, that I enjoyed Moby Dick. Not that anything like a whale, but somehow I don't completely identify with Captain Ahab. But that novel makes me look at myself and my own illusions about life as few other stories do.
Oh, it's a profound story. It's a great treatise on whaling.
Yes, that is it.
And it is a great treatise on madness also. But it's much more than that, because we don't have to be whalers and we don't have to be mad to recognize that, as you say, Captain Ahab is ourselves, that all of us have got some kind of white whale in our conscious or unconscious in our dreams, and we're seeking it and trying to capture it and kill it.
Avoid being destroyed by it.
And avoid, yeah. You know, Socrates said that an unexamined life is not worth living. I think we're saying here that an unexamined novel, a novel about which you don't think, but just
is not worth reading.
Is not worth reading. That's right. You must involve yourself with it. You must let it work on you, but at the same time, your mind must remain active. You must read it both actively and passionately. Not passively, but passionately.
I think it's a very good point.